So we're doing the Dharma request. It's on this either yellow sheet or maybe on the back we can grab some. Yes. So the spirit of the Dharma request is that the Dharma isn't spoken casually, it's spoken upon request. So the monks don't go out on the street and start, preaching the Dharma, trying to convert people. It's people who want to come to the monastery and learn the Dharma, or they join the website and come listen to the Dharma. And so there's definitely a sense that listening to the Dharma is a practice. It's not a passive activity. When you listen to the Dharma, there's a kind of sincere request, wanting to learn. And then as we listen, there's a kind of process of self-reflection and growth, so that the speaking is only half of it, you could say. The other half is the listening. So it's not a simple act to listen to the Dharma. Okay, so if people have the sheets, so what we'll do is one of our laymen here will circle the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, the altar, and then make a formal request, and people can join in the Chinese and English. They're on the top of the page, and then we'll have an invocation, which is a call and response, and then we'll recite a verse for opening the sutra. Okay? Yeah. So please put your palms together, and we can, in our hearts, invite the Triple Jewel to come and join us.
亲大德身体，为此法会济一切众生，亲赞妙法论，教导我们如何了生脱死离苦得乐，殊真无生。With the Sangha, weekly virtue out of compassion, for the sake of this assembly and all living beings, please send the wonderful Dharma will to teach us how to live suffering and attain bliss and end birth and death, and quickly realize non-birth.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa.
Homage to the blessed, noble, and perfectly enlightened one.
Homage to the blessed, noble, and perfectly enlightened one.
Namo sadanto sucedoye alahadi samyao sambuddhoje.
Namo sadanto sucedoye alahadi samyao sambuddhoje.
Recite together. Wu sheng shen shen wei miao fa, bai jian wan jie nan zao yu. 我今见闻得受持，愿解如来真实义。Supreme and wondrous Dharma, subtle and profound, rarely is encountered even in a billion eons. But now we see and hear it and accept it reverently. May we truly understand the Buddha's actual meaning. All Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, Venerable Master, Dharma Master, and all good and wise friends and fellow cultivators, Amitabha. Good evening welcome to tonight's Sutra lecture at Berkeley Buddhist Monastery. Today is December 9th, 2017. We're getting into the time when the days get really short. You have a little bit of longer nights. People put up Christmas trees to keep it brighter throughout the day. As we have a little Christmas tree here on the side here at Berkeley Monastery. And we have our sutra lecture. People came out during this Friday evening to come listen to the Dharma and get the light of the Dharma. And so tonight, Reverend Heng Sure and Jing Sure are both away in Minnesota, where I hear it's something like 15 degrees Fahrenheit. So I think it's cold here with snow, so that doesn't quite compare with what we have here. And so Jin-Wei Sure and myself will be, you could say, giving the sutra lecture tonight. And I don't know if Jin-Wei Sure actually has been on the camera yet since he was a monk, because he just came back from Poland and England, and before that he was Qing Xian Sure, and now he's Jin-Wei Sure, Wei Yi the Wei, I think first tone, Wei, Jin-Wei Sure, and so we're very happy he's back, and so it's the first time he's coming up on this Dharma platform here to share some Dharma reflections. So I'm sure he's very nervous. Like, I'm probably very nervous, but I remember the first time coming up was really nervous. And I remember, I'll tell a quick story, which I thought was a really good story in terms of the practice of Dharma listening. There's a story about the Buddha going off on alms round with all the monks, and he left a shami to take care of the monastery. And so the shami was part of the monastery, and then a really wealthy layman came by the monastery and invited the shami to go out for alms. right? So the shaman's okay, so he goes out, and after he gets the food from this wealthy layman, gives him very nice food, afterwards the layman very sincerely gets up and bows before him, kneels just like Mr. Yap did, and closes his eyes and makes Dharma request. And this shaman is sitting there going, and he's so scared because what do I do? And he actually runs out the door. He runs out the door, runs to the monastery. And so the story goes on, and the layman just there sincerely, with his palms together, eyes closed, and he waits 5 minutes, 10 minutes, no sound. So he finally opens his eye, and he looks, and there's no one there. And they say in the story, it says he actually gets awakened. He wakes up. On that moment, he gains some kind of level of awakening because he realizes emptiness. And so out of that realization, he's super grateful to the shaman. So he runs after looking for the shaman to show his appreciation for the teaching. The shaman at this point is really scared. He's barricaded himself in the monastery. He's locked all the doors. He's hiding behind. And so the layman is trying to get in the monastery. Finally gets in, sees the monk, and the monk is so scared. He also wakes up. This is the story. And so they both wake up. And so that was the story. I don't know how the principle exactly works in the story, but it's an interesting story about how that sometimes even the Dharma not being spoken, if one's ready for the teaching and the Dharma, one actually can wake up.
How fear can become your friend.
And how fear can be your friend. Yeah, and how fear can be your friend. And even if the Dharma is spoken not well, so Jin-Wei Sure and myself are still here, sitting in front of you after the Dharma request, that one can still receive an awakening.
If I not run away,
Yeah,
if I will not run away to the end of the lecture, it means that it's success for me today.
Yeah, it will be a success, so not run away. So what we've been doing on the weeks that Reverend Heng Sure is here not lecturing, we've been going into flip the page, the Sutra of the Buddha's Teaching on Infinite Life. This is called the 佛说无量寿经, and it's a very important Pure Land text in the Buddhist tradition. If people know, there's oftentimes they say there's 3 Pure Land sutras. One sutra is the shorter Amitabha Sutra that we recite every other evening in the monastery. One is the contemplation of Amitabha Buddha. How it says, 观无量寿经, the contemplations of the infinite life of Amitayus, of the Buddha of infinite life. And then the third one is this one, the Sutra of the Buddha's teachings on infinite life. And so these 3 texts form, you could say, the foundation, the kind of sutra foundation for the Pure Land school. There's a couple other texts like Great Strength Bodhisattva's a chapter in the Shrangama Sutra, and something they say also Universal Worthy Bodhisattva's Conduct and Vows chapter in the Avatamsaka Sutra, because they both talk about the Pure Land. But these 3 texts really focus on Amitabha Buddha. And so if people know Jing-Fo Shi, whose name means Buddha, Jing-Fo, I think probably for Amitabha Buddha, really likes to recite the Buddha's name, so he chose to lecture on this sutra. And I think we've probably been lecturing on it for a couple of years, and we haven't got past page 1. So we might get to, I don't think we'll get past page 1, but we'll try to make a little progress. So what we usually do at the beginning, in the spirit of the Pure Land school and the sutra, is that we recite Amitabha's Buddha's name for maybe just a couple of minutes. And this lets us to kind of, for those of us who maybe came from afar, drove over here, or had a busy day, reciting, really has a way of gathering in our senses. We do it mindfully, listening to ourselves, listening to our neighbors, reciting, you could say a spiritual name, Amitabha Buddha, who's right above. Then there's actually, you could say, something inside settles, and then when the Dharma, we are reflecting on it, it goes deeper. So if we can just recite a couple of minutes, I think that will be very helpful for all of us to settle our minds and hearts. Okay? So it's, I think, pretty simple. Namo Ami Tofo. Namo Ami Tofo. So 6 syllables. And it means the Buddha of limitless life. I see someone's not quite sure what that means. So the Buddha of limitless life is a Buddha who is actually right above there, and he made vows to rescue living beings out of suffering. And so many people recite his name as a practice, wishing to be reborn in his land after at the end of their lives. But in the Chan school, they also say Amitabha Buddha is your awakened potential. So you're just reciting kind of to return back to your potential for awakening. So you can go the Buddha at the end of your life or the Buddha inside. Right? Okay. Namo Amito Phai 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 Namo Amito 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 Okay, if I can invite everyone to open your sutra text to page 1 and 2, the front cover. And so what we've been doing is reading the sutra text and then having a kind of explanation. So what we do is we read the Chinese and then we read the English. And given that we've been going very slowly through the sutra text, what I would like to do is we can recite the page on the left in Chinese, and after that we can read the page on the right. And maybe we could read the sutra text together. So it'll save a little bit of time. Okay, so we will, for those who are not familiar with reading Chinese, there's this kind of romanization below. You see like W-O is wo. There's also these kind of strange symbols above the vowels, like a hook. It's wo, like a bungee cord, wo. And then sometimes has a little thing that goes up. It goes one, and then ru. No, that's still up. Ru, shi is down. So it's wo, wen, ru, shi. So you can try to follow the tones as we read. The down tone goes down. The line across is a flat tone. And so this is a little bit different than English in the sense that these characters, when the tones are different, actually mean different things. I'm a kind of American-born Chinese, so my tones are actually quite bad. And so a lot of Chinese people listen to me try to speak Chinese and they go, what is he saying? Because if you actually say the wrong tone, it means a completely different character. Like the word ma is horse. Ma is like a question mark. Ma is to be angry at somebody. And what else? Ma it's like mother. Your mother. You have also numb. Your hand's numb. Ma. Yeah, so you can see if you just get the tone a little wrong, people go, what are you saying? Are you numb? Are you a horse? What's going on? So we can just try, so everyone can maybe try together to read the Chinese, and then after that we can read the English together. Okay? So again, we can maybe put our palms together and read the Chinese. 我闻如是，一是佛住广泽城，其舍觉山中，于大比丘众12000人俱，一切大圣，神通已达。其名曰：尊者了本纪，尊者正愿，尊者正语，尊者大号，尊者人贤，尊者离垢，尊者明文，尊者善事，尊者具足，尊者牛王，尊者优罗宾罗迦舍，尊者迦叶迦舍，尊者拿提迦舍，尊者摩诃迦舍，尊者舍利弗，尊者大目犍连，尊者皆宾那，尊者大住，尊者大精致，尊者摩诃周那，尊者满愿子，尊者离藏，尊者流冠，尊者坚福，尊者面王，尊者义称，尊者人性，尊者家乐，尊者善来，尊者罗云，尊者阿难，皆如斯等上首者也。Okay, very nice. On the right side, English, together. Thus I have heard, at one time the Buddha was staying in Vulture Peak Mountain, in the capital city of Magadha, together with 12,000 great bhikshus. All were great sages who had already attained spiritual powers. Their names are Venerable Realizing the Ultimate Origin, Venerable Right Vows, Venerable Right Speech, Venerable Great Name, Venerable Benevolent Goodness, Venerable Free of Defilement, Venerable Renown, Venerable Reliable Goodness, Venerable Completeness, Venerable Lord of Cow, Venerable Urubilva Kashyapena, Venerable Gaya Kashyapa, Venerable Nadi Kashyapa, Venerable Maha Kashyapa, Venerable Shariputra, Venerable Mahamaglayana, Venerable Kapina, Venerable Great Existing, Venerable Great Pure Aspiration, Venerable Mahachunda, Venerable Son of Complete in Vows, Venerable Free of Obstruction, Venerable River, Venerable Mighty Conqueror, Venerable King of Perfect Appearance, Venerable Extraordinary Vehicle, Venerable Kind-Hearted, Venerable Joy and Happiness, Venerable Welcome, Venerable Rahula, and Venerable Ananda. All of them were leaders among the assembly. Okay. So if people have been following this sutra series, we've been going over each of the venerables in this list. And the Spirit has been trying to introduce them so you get to know them. It's like everyone here in the assembly, we're all here together. And if we were actually go through like person by person, well, this is this person, this is this person, this is this person, and you kind of introduce who they are. You know, they took the 3 refuges, 5 precepts at this time. They cultivate this Dharma door. You know, this is the trials or difficulties they faced and how they got liberated. And so these disciples of the Buddha are, you can say, the great Arhat disciples, the great sages who realized the way and, you could say, transcended the cycle of birth and death. And each has a very interesting story to them. And so rather than just going through the names and just reading them, the idea was to give people a sense of who these people are and use them in a way of reflection in our own lives for practice. You can say our society puts up many, I don't want to say they're role models exactly, but we see many people in front of us who show us various behaviors, you could say, various ways of acting. Some good, some not so good. And so we have to choose what we want to follow. So in a sense, these are the Buddha's exemplar disciples, people who met the Buddha and decided to cultivate the way and wake up. And so in a sense, they're good role models for us. So when we hear their stories, we can say, well, how much are they like me? You know, what can I learn from them? What did they do that I'm similar to? And then how do they transform their afflictions? And so tonight, we got to pretty close to the end, which is Venerable Joy and Happiness, Venerable Nanda. I don't know if people know who Venerable Nanda is. Connie? Maybe get the mic. Yeah.
Is he the same monk that I guess the Indian classic class studies?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a book by Ashvagosha, who is a very famous Sanskrit poet. He writes about Venerable Nanda, and it's translated into English as Handsome Nanda, because he was very handsome. He was very handsome. He was actually the Buddha's half-brother. He was actually the Buddha's half-brother. So we don't actually, so it's actually also interesting because we don't really think of the Buddha oftentimes as like a person sometimes. You know, we see him as a kind of a statue. It's, oh, there's a Buddha, and he's kind of like an ideal archetype out there, far away.
Like godlike.
Almost, yeah, kind of godlike. Make sure you use the mic, because the people. So, because, but when you actually read these stories, you realize that Buddha had a family. He had brothers and he had a brother and a sister, you know, and so, and he interacted with them. And so Venerable Nanda was actually the Buddha's half-brother. If people know, the Buddha's father's name was King Suddhodana, and his mother was Queen Maya. And Queen Maya died very early, giving birth to Prince Siddhartha, who later became Shakyamuni Buddha. And so what happened to the Buddha, that he was actually taken care of by his mother's sister, younger sister, named Mahapajapati. And so Venerable Nanda was actually born just a couple days, a number of days later than the Buddha. So they're very close in age to his mother's sister's sister. But what happens, and I guess in when also you read these families, is they actually have a lot of inter-family marriages. Like they marry a cousin or something, and so but regardless, so the Buddha is actually raised by his aunt, who is actually then has a brother because they share the same father. King Sudana, had multiple wives, so they share the same father, which is Venerable Nanda. And so Venerable Nanda, as Connie pointed out, Ashvaghosha wrote a book about him, or a poem about him, called Handsome Nanda. He was very handsome, very attractive. And when he was born, the reason they translated the word here, joy and happiness, actually Nanda means joyful. We also know the word Ananda, right? The Buddha's cousin. That means like extremely joyful. Like an intensifier. So, but his name means happy, joyful, because when he was born, the family was very happy. Was very happy that he was born. And so you could say he lived a very, probably, I didn't really find too much about his childhood, but I think we can imagine. So this is kind of imaginative storytelling. He probably had a very pleasant life, being royalty and being very handsome and being, probably, probably everything went well for him in his life. He in the beginning probably had a little bit of an older brother, was probably kind of overshadowing him a little bit, but it seemed like they had a good relationship. When the Buddha came back, he wasn't upset with him. So probably the Buddha didn't tease him like I did tease my younger brother. And so they probably got along. He had a pretty happy life. And actually, when the story really picks up about him, that he's famous for, is that he got married to the most beautiful girl in the kingdom. And her name, let me get the name right. I think it's Janapa Kalyani. Janapa Kalyani. And so her name literally means, or it's like an epithet, like the beauty of the kingdom, the beauty of the country. Right? So he got married to her. And so you can probably imagine that's kind of like we have many these kind of Disney movies or love songs or whatever stories that we have, the prince, actually like princes, prince and princesses, and so this is kind of like the perfect match. Very handsome Nanda is marrying the most beautiful girl in the country. So what happens in this story though is they get married and then the Buddha shows up. The Buddha shows up. So after the Buddha wakes up,
A little bit ruined the plan.
I don't know, ruin the plan, but okay. So the Buddha comes to bless them. To bless them. So it's about a year after the Buddha's awakening, right? So the Buddha, people know the story. The Buddha was Prince Siddhartha. He leaves the palace, right? He cultivates in the forest, the wilderness. Finally, he sits under the Bodhi tree and wakes up. And then he teaches the first 5 disciples. At one point, he decides to go back to his family. Sometimes, again, we don't really think about that, but the Buddha didn't just kind of selfishly go off on his own, wake up, and not come back home. He actually came back home, and his virtue and inspiring presence really moved many of his clansmen, his fellow family members, to become monastics as well, to follow him in his footsteps. And so anyways, he comes back, and Venerable Nanda just got married, and he goes to the wedding, not the wedding, goes afterwards, and he kind of greets his brother, and leaves his alms bowl with his brother, and then he goes back to the monastery. So the brother has the alms bowl, so I better return it to the Buddha. So he follows the Buddha out, and he goes all the way to where the Buddha is staying. Now his wife says, "You better come back." Some of the stories say she spits on the ground and says, "By the time the spit dries, you better be back." Some stories say that. And so he goes off following the Buddha, his older brother, and they get to the monastery, and he sees the monastery, and the Buddha there actually encourages, oh, would you want to be a monk? He says, okay, I'll try it out. Yeah, I'll be a monk, you know. So he actually then decides to be a monk, okay, but he just got married to the most beautiful girl in the country, right? And so there's actually a sutta that Jin-Wei myself found called the Nanda Sutta. It's a sutta all about Nanda. And it talks about him now as a monk being kind of depressed. He's like, and the sutta starts with him, he's in Jeta's Grove, Anapadinka's monastery, and it says, on one occasion, Venerable Nanda, the Blessed One's brother, announced to a large number of monks. So he told a large number of monks that are gathered together, he says, I don't enjoy leading the holy life. I don't enjoy being a monk, my friends. He says, I can't keep this up. I can't keep up the holy life. I would like to give up the training and return back to being a commoner, return to the common life, become a householder again. So he's sitting there kind of lamenting, I just can't take this, living out here in the wilderness. I guess they have Jeta's Grove, so it's probably not so bad. But they don't probably eat the best food. They don't get the most fine clothing. You're exposed to the elements. Not quite like the palace. So he's like, he doesn't have his wife. He doesn't have his beautiful wife, and so he's a little bit depressed. I think I don't know if I can do this anymore. So then one of these monks hears Venerable Nanda say that, so he goes to the Buddha and tells the Buddha, well, your brother, Venerable Nanda, said that he wants to go back to the common life. And so the Buddha said, okay, call him over. Get him over here. So he gets him over. The suttas are very formal. He says, come monk, call Venerable Nanda my name, bring him over, says, the teacher calls you Nanda. And so they bring Nanda over. And so Venerable Nanda comes to the Buddha, and when he comes, he bows to him and then sits to one side. That's very appropriate etiquette, right? You bow, then you sit to a side, not right in front of the Buddha, right? And then he says, as he was sitting there, the Buddha said to him, is it true, Nanda, that you have announced to a large number of monks, I don't enjoy leading the holy life, my friends. I can't keep up the holy life. Giving up the training, I will return to the common life. And Venerable Nanda says, yes, Lord. He says, but why, Nanda? Why don't you enjoy leading the holy life? Why don't you keep up the holy life? Why, giving up the training, will you return to the common life? Okay, so now is in terms of the movies, as the suspension builds. So he says, Lord, as I was leaving home, a Shakyan girl, they're in the Shakyan clan, the envy of the countryside. Everyone really envied her beauty, glanced up at me with her hair half combed and said, hurry back, master. Recollecting that I don't enjoy leading the holy life, I can't keep up the holy life. Giving up the training, a return to the common life. So basically he's thinking of his wife back at home who told him to come back quickly. He's kind of sitting there as a monk going, I don't know about this. I left my pleasant householder life for, I don't know about this. Right? And so what does the Buddha do at that point? And what do people think he does? Some people probably know the story, but some people don't. Any ideas what he would do? Okay, Connie, have you heard the story?
I read it when I was supposed to do
Okay.
work study.
Well, you can try. What do you think happens next?
Was this when he brought Nanda to the heavens to
Mm-hmm.
look at, more beautiful beings and
Mm-hmm.
compared his wife to those beings?
Yeah, so what happens is the Buddha says, okay, how about we go to take a tour of the heavens. So 2 weeks ago, Reverend Heng Sure gave a lecture where he talked about all the different heavenly realms and how pleasant they were, right? And so the Buddha says, okay, how about I take you to the heavens? So it says here that the Buddha brought Venerable Nanda to the heavens of Triamshimsha heaven. or Tavantimsa in the Pali, the heaven of the 33. This is where Lord Shakra resides. And in some other places, they say that on the way there, they passed by a mountain where they saw a kind of a monkey that was burned. Okay, so he's got like the nose, it's a female monkey, her nose was like burned, ears like burned. And he actually asked Venerable Nanda, he says, who's more attractive, your wife, Jannapi Kalyanami, or this monkey? And of course, he says, what are you talking about? Of course, my wife is far more beautiful than this monkey who's got, burned body parts. And so it's okay. So he keeps going on, and they go to the heavens, and they get to the palace, and they see 500 heavenly maidens around this palace. Here he translates as dove-footed nymphs, 500 dove-footed nymphs. And then the Buddha asked Venerable Nanda the same question. He says, which is lovelier, better looking, more charming? The Shakyan girl, the envy of the countryside, or these 500 dove-footed nymphs? And then Venerable Nanda replies back, compared to these 500 dove-footed nymphs, the Shakyan girl, the envy of the countryside, is like a monkey with her, body, her ears and nose burnt off, cut off. She doesn't count. She's not even a small fraction. There's just no comparison. These 500 dove-footed nymphs are far lovelier, far better looking, far more charming. So then the Buddha says, take joy, Nanda, take joy. I am a guarantor for getting these 500 dove-footed nymphs. Basically saying, if you cultivate in the holy life, after you die, you'll have these 500 nymphs, 500 heavenly maidens, attending to you. And so then Venerable Nanda says, if the Blessed One is my guarantor for 500 dove-footed nymphs, I will enjoy leading the holy life under the Blessed One. So he's okay, that's a deal. I will stay in the holy life if I get these 500, heavenly maidens, right? So the stories, there's different versions of the story. Master Hua tells a story that at that point then Venerable Nanda becomes very vigorous in his practice. Now he's got his eyes set on the heavenly palace with 500 maidens. And so he's very vigorous in his practice. But then one day the Buddha says, how about let's go take a tour in the hells? He says, oh, go to the hells? He says, yeah, let's go take a look. And so they go to the hells, and what they see is he sees these two, you could say, kind of, I don't know if they're called yakshas or rakshasas, these kind of hell guards, you could say, and they're kind of tending a fire for a pot of like burning oil. And this is how the story goes. And he's saying, and so Venerable Nanda's looking at these two guys and saying, what are they doing? Why are they just sitting here? They're not really tending the fire. It's kind of cold, and the oil in the pot is just not really boiling. What's going on here? So we gotta go ask them what they're doing. So he goes and asks these two guardians in the hells, and he says, what are you guys doing here? You're not doing your job. You're supposed to keep tending the fire, and it's cold. So the two guards said, we're here because the Buddha has a half-brother named Nanda. And he's right now cultivating the way really vigorously, and he's going to go to the heavens. But after that, after he enjoys his heavenly blessings, he's going to go fall right directly into this hot, boiling pot of oil. But it's going to still be a very long time, so we just don't have to do anything. We're just waiting here for that to happen. So then the story goes, then Venerable Nanda wakes up and goes, oh my goodness. And then really cultivates vigorously and actually becomes an arhat. He lets go of his desire for the heavens and actually cultivates for real liberation, because he sees that even the pleasures of the heavens, the bliss of the heavens, is transitory. It's not forever. However joyful the sensual pleasures are, however pleasant we can make them, in the end, they don't last. And so down he goes. Even just going back to the human realm probably after that would be considered very miserable. I think I remember somebody telling me that people commit suicide, one is like an extreme loss of wealth, but also sometimes an extreme gain of wealth actually also causes major kind of depression. Like winning the lottery isn't like the best of stuff, best thing that could happen, because it's like the shock to the system of getting something so different kind of changes your whole reality construct. So anyways, for him, so he realizes that, okay, maybe I need to cultivate. And this sutta is actually very interesting. It goes a little differently. It's actually a little bit more psychological. And it actually says he comes back from the heavens with the Buddha, and then, and this is where I guess you have fellow monks, companions, is kind of interesting. So the monk says here, then the monks who were companions of Venerable Nanda went around addressing him as they were a hired hand, a person who had been bought. He said to Venerable Nanda, they say, has been hired. Venerable Nanda, they say, has been bought. He's leading the holy life for the sake of nymphs. The Blessed One is his guarantor for getting 500 dove-footed nymphs. Basically, they're saying, Venerable Nanda, he's here as a what do you call it? Hired hand. He's not really here to cultivate. He's here because he's been bought. He's been, he's got this kind of deal going on with the Buddha. So because the Buddha promises him 500, heavenly maidens, therefore he's here cultivating. And so at this point, when Venerable Nanda heard this, he became humiliated, ashamed, and disgusted that the monks who were his companions were addressing him as they would a hired hand and a person who had been bought. They were basically treating him as kind of like, somebody who is not really a monk, kind of just going through the form. So then what did Venerable Nanda do? He says he went to dwell alone, secluded, heedful, ardent, and resolute. He in no time entered and remained in the supreme goal of the holy life, for which clansmen rightfully go forth from home into homelessness, knowing and realizing it for himself right in the here and now. He knew birth is ended, the holy life fulfilled, the task is done, there's nothing further for the sake of this world, and thus Venerable Nanda became another one of the Arhants. So what happened is he was kind of ashamed of himself, he was ashamed of himself, he was a little bit embarrassed, and so he kind of made an internal resolve, say, okay, I'm really going to cultivate, I'm really going to, practice. And so it says he went alone, he went by himself and kind of kept himself secluded and then became very vigorous in his practice. And he actually cultivated so vigorously that he woke up. It says he realized the supreme goal of the holy life, which is nirvana. Right? Nirvana is not like what we see kind of in advertisements, even like on bottles now say taste nirvana. It's not that kind of nirvana. Nirvana here is essentially the ending of suffering, the ending of outflows, the ending of birth and death. In the very beginning, Mr. Yap, when the Dharma request, made a request saying, requesting a teaching that ends birth and death. Well, that's what the Buddha's teaching is. The Buddha's teaching is a path that leads us out of suffering ultimately. Not just temporarily, not just a temporary fix that makes us feel happy for a little bit, but really an ultimate solution. And so this is what the Buddha taught him. And so it's what's interesting, the sutta goes on, is that one of a deva, a devata comes, a goddess comes and tells the Buddha that Venerable Nanda has woken up. And then what happens is Venerable Nanda comes to the Buddha himself and says, basically says, he bows to one side, bows down and sits to one side, and he says, Lord, about the Blessed One's guarantee for those 500 maidens, I hereby release the Blessed One from that promise. Because in the commentary goes, because the joy, the happiness of nirvana far surpasses the joy of the heavens. So the Buddha made good on his promise already. He already realized nirvana. So this is the beginning of it. And then, he says, he says, Venerable Nanda, having comprehended your awareness with my own awareness, the Buddha says, I can see your mind with my mind. I realize that you have ended the outflows, have entered and remain in the effluent free or the outflow free awareness and discernment liberation. You directly know for yourself in the here and now. So, and he says that the Deva told me about this, the goddess told me about this. And at that time, the Buddha said a verse. He said, the mire of sensuality is crossed over. The thorn of sensuality is crushed. The ending of delusion is reached. He doesn't quiver from pleasures and pains. A monk. So basically, Venerable Nanda is, you could say, a true monk. He's realized nibbana, and he's no longer moved by pleasure or pain. So he doesn't get attracted to pleasure, and he doesn't get attracted or runs away from pain. So that's the story of Venerable Ananda. And I was thinking of your question?
So in the story, Nanda's treating his wife as an object of desire, which is like pretty easy to cut through. But like, what if he's really emotionally attached to his wife, like on the psychological level? Is it, yeah. So I'm just wondering, like, how can he deal with that kind of attachment?
You mean emotional attachment?
Right, like seeing his wife as a family member, not an object.
An object. Okay. Do you want
I think I can try
to?
it.
You can grab the mic, so it sounds like he was ready to go.
It's actually, you know, I have the similar reflection. What it's like we see in the center of, like the sutta said, the holy life is the renunciation. Right? You leave the sensual pleasure in many ways, and you separate it. In this case, with loved ones. And it's interesting, like you said, that it's like how it works psychologically, right? And I think that very often, if we attach to someone or something, is in us, in our heart, kind of feeling of ownership, that she is mine, in many ways, you know, and or this object, this, if I'm super attached, is probably mine cup in my mind, right? And it's interesting, this is how we build the relationship with something what we really deeply attached. And it's, for sure, is kind of like we know from the second noble truth, the attachment or the craving is the cost of suffering. And this is the main kind of task for us, to recognize and let go all of those attachments. I don't know, it helps.
Well, maybe I can add a few thoughts. So, as you mentioned, this particular sutta, you could say it seems fairly simple because the affliction that's being singled out is sensuality, right? This kind of this attachment to sense pleasures. When it comes to what you're asking, I think there's many levels to, which is the inner feelings and emotions around relationships. And so it seems to me that's a very tricky area to move into because I don't think you can actually just do a blanket statement that you say, well, you kind of cut off all emotional relationship. We kind of use the word like cut out emotions almost in Buddhism, but actually, let's say joy, that's an emotion. Let's say caring for the other person in a deep way, that's an emotion, right? There's emotions that you could say are actually liberating, and there's emotions that are entangling. So like the emotions that I think Jin-Wei just talked about, the emotions that are kind of self-centered, like that have a possessiveness to them, like she's mine or something in a certain way, or she has to meet certain expectations of mine for me to be happy, those would be kind of emotional entanglements rather than a kind of a selfless kind of wish for well-being. What's actually interesting is I actually had a similar thought, being a fairly modern person, is that, okay, so what's the other side of the story about his wife? So I went and looked into that too, and actually found a story about her. So, but I was going to pause because, did you have more you wanted to share about okay, what we're going to do is going to have a reflection on this story, but maybe I'll tell her story and then we can have an overall reflection on both. So her wife's name was Janapa Kalyani, right? So clearly she was the most beautiful girl in the kingdom. And here it says her name was the epithet meant grace of the kingdom. And so she was engaged to the prince, Venerable Nanda at that time was a prince. And so she got married. And so the Buddha comes and she's a little bit suspicious and sees her husband leaving with the Buddha. Okay, so that's, right? And so then she finds out that he became a monk, and it devastates her. She's really upset, really upset. She's very depressed, she's very upset. And then finally, this is interesting, these Buddhist stories are not quite like Disney stories. She says, okay, I'm so depressed, I might as well join the Buddhist order. Okay, but it's not too strange, because actually, it was interesting. I was reading these stories. So she becomes a nun under Venerable Mahaprajapati, which is the Buddha's stepmom, because she's the first nun, right? So she's becoming a nun under her husband's mom, okay? And also the Buddha's half-sister also becomes a nun. I think her name's also something, I don't remember what her name was, but it was interesting describing why she became a nun, because it was very clear, as it says in the suttas, that the reason she became a nun was because she was lonely and wanted to join all her family who had become monastic. So that was her motivation. So it's interesting, if you can just imagine what it must have been like, in the Buddha's family, where so many of his like brothers and relatives, like Ananda's his cousin, Devadatta was also a cousin. I mean, many of his family members, his son, Rahula became a monk. His wife, Yashoda, became a nun. I mean, his family, many of his family members became monastic. So it's an interesting thing to reflect on. So she becomes a nun, right? But she doesn't want to go listen to the Buddha speak Dharma. She's really attached to her beauty, and she knows the Buddha might talk about that, so she's like, I don't want to draw near the Buddha, because, so she's really, really still very attached to her beauty, because she's very, very attractive. And then finally she goes to the Buddha. And the story is interesting. It says the Buddha magically makes appear a very beautiful woman fanning him next to him. And so she says that this she's a nun at this point, Janapa Kalyani, is mesmerized by the girl because she's very beautiful. Whoa, she's very beautiful. She's watching her. And as the Dharma talk is going on, the Buddha has this girl slowly get older. Slowly get older, gets wrinkles, and in front of her actually dies, and then becomes like a heap of ashes on the floor. And in that process, she wakes up and becomes a Shrotapana, becomes a stream enterer in the story. And then later, she hears the Buddha speak, teach on the decomposition of the body. A teaching on the decomposition of the body, actually becomes an arhat and ends birth and death. And so she's able to let go of her attachment to physical beauty and attachment to the body, and by doing so wakes up. So that's her side of the story, which is an interesting story to kind of think about. So as I said, these aren't quite Disney stories. I don't think we have any Disney stories. Usually the Disney stories end at the scene when the prince and the princess get married, right? And then the movie ends there. Happy ending, they live happily ever after. And so the Buddhist story, usually the ending might be that both become arhants. So they actually live happily ever after, because they no longer have any suffering. So in the Buddhist story is actually the true Disney ending, because oftentimes, you kind of can wonder, do those Disney stories actually end happily ever after? You think of like Cinderella and the Buddha and the prince. I mean, they grew up in very different value systems. So like, if they actually live together, would they actually get along? If you think about it, right? So, but in here you have the Buddha and his brother, and then his brother's wife. They all become monastics and they all cultivate. And so I think what Jin-Wei was talking about, and we were thinking about having one place of reflection, is the principle of renunciation, renouncing. So clearly in these stories, the Buddha's brother, Nanda, renounced the household life, renounced his wife, and became a monk. So the tricky thing about the word renounce is that, for one, I don't think we ever hear that word in America. Usually it's about getting stuff. Like renouncing is it's like, wow, that's like really sacrificing something. Gosh, that's like the exact opposite of like the American ethos of like getting and making sure that I've got everything I have. Renouncing is like giving stuff up, But the tricky thing with the word renounce is that there's a built-in feeling that I'm giving up something I really want. And in the Buddhist system, actually what real renunciation is that you give it up because you see through it. You no longer want it. You put it down. So like what Jin-Wei was talking about, this sense of ownership, right? We think we own things. If we really, like he said, we're really attached to this cup, we say, well, this is my cup. If we had like a little story around, like this cup came from the Buddha and got passed down to the generations, and here it is, it's like a sign of somebody who's awakened or something. They go, oh, wow, this is a lot of meaning, And if it were to get broken, then we would get really upset. But if it's this cup, we don't put all that story around it, and we don't even think it's ours, then oftentimes, if anything happens to it, we don't suffer.
Actually, in the Thai forest tradition, they have an expression that they call the cup is already broken.
Yeah.
And it's this kind of relationship to everything. This body is already broken, that because as we know that everything in this world have the birth, some existence, shorter or longer, and after that, pass away, right? Is the actually question about the time. So if we are still kind of keeping bigger picture in our minds, it helps relate when we actually will experience some loss. And that's, I talked to Jin-Chuan. I was really struck by kind of expression of Ajahn Amaro when he said, it was kind of a question about renunciation. And so he said, that, and it's really related to this story, what Nanda, that it was in him movement some, he sacrificed something actually. It was kind of self-surrender, and it was difficult for sure. And it's even he recollect the option to live they call the holy life. So return to the household life. So it's really interesting because Ajahn Amaro said that in the West particularly, but not only, we think that by getting things we can be complete, right? And it's difficult to believe that letting go of things give for us liberation. It's kind of theoretically we can believe that, but really it's really like that. And and it's really kind of struck me that this observation that, of course, that we lost something what was important for us, dear ones. This kind of shadow cross our heart, and like he said, we can lighten this shadow by understanding that that this karmic resolves, this feeling of loss is the karmic resolve of assumption that we were owner in the first place of these things. So we really cannot own anything, included our body, included all possessions what we have. They have this all natural, I can say, the karmic patterns. They come into life, live, and go. So often the Master Hua said, if you think that you are honor your body, say to your body, don't be older, right? Or don't be sick, And we can, of course, carry, and make use skillfully. But in the end, we always have to say goodbye, unfortunately. So it's really interesting for me how we can skillfully make relationship with all objects what we have around us, included our body. And if the feeling of attachment arise, like I mentioned, is strong identity around that. This is mine body. This is, or it's many forms can take. This is. We can identify with our roles what we play. I am a monk, right, in this conventional realm. I am the doctor, and whatsoever. But what's happened when this doctor become in retirement?
Retirement.
Retirement. It's many people have really big crises because they build identity around who I am. It was a doctor, teacher, or a parent when the children leave the home. What I can do now? What a role I can play, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah. So I think that was when we were discussing it. I think a very important insight is that. So it's not so much that you're letting go because of things you own. It's because fundamentally we can't actually own anything to begin with, right? We actually can't own anything, really. For one, from the Buddhist perspective, the self itself is actually empty and a conditioned thing, but the objects that we're trying to own are also conditioned things. They're not something we really own. So people went to Buddha-Root Farm last time. I heard a really, I thought a very insightful song that Fabrizio played. Reverend Heng Sure asked him to play. That's actually, I think, on the website. Jerry put it on the website. It's called "Pass It Along." I have to think if I remember the main. So basically, the song is about a luthier, someone who makes guitars, right? And he says, I made this guitar, and it's, I'm making music with it. But one day, I think this will be, somebody else will be playing this guitar, and they'll be playing much more beautiful, much more stronger and bolder songs than I can ever play on it. So then the main chorus goes, pass it along, may it land in careful hands when we're gone. And he goes, we don't pass it along, you hold on to it for a moment, we don't own it, pass it along. Which I thought was a very beautiful teaching, that so all these things we have are essentially just here with us for a period of time. And that one's actually interesting because rather than thinking about the impermanence being the permanence is the self, is us. That the objects might last longer than me, right? This monastery will last longer than, say, Jin-Wei and myself, probably. And then I thought what the next part about it was very beautiful was that it's saying, may it land in careful hands when it's gone, when we're gone, when I'm gone. Meaning that I'm just here as a caretaker. So it doesn't mean that, okay, since I don't own anything, everything's impermanent, what do? I just throw them away, I just, break them, doesn't matter, nothing matters. It's like, oh, I'm then taking care of it for somebody else. There's a sense of careful attention, mindfulness, a sense of seeing this deeper relationships that are at play. So that's why when I think Echo asked about, well, how did Venerable Nanda see the relationships? The sutta doesn't go into it so precisely because it talks mostly about sensual desire here. But my sense is that looking at the Buddha's life story and looking at many of the teachings that he gave around relationships, that there were probably many elements of relationships that were, you could say, almost taken for granted back then, about how people treated each other and how people cared for each other in a family, that in some sense now is a little bit up for grabs. I think it almost has to be kind of defined family by family, because there's no kind of, you could say, universal set of values that are automatically applied that a family goes with. So it's kind of, each family has to develop it a little bit for themselves if the family is going to work. Otherwise, what often happens, as I think people see, is that the kids grow up with their set of values. The parents might have another set of values from 2 or 3 decades ago. They might have grown up in different cultures altogether, and so there's a lot of conflict because there was never really agreed upon values in a way in the family that everyone says, oh yeah, these are why we're living together. So then what happens is the family becomes lots of people who are strangers living in the same place. Mostly they're probably just relating to their cell phone, pushing buttons on a cell phone. So back then they didn't have these smartphones. They had, I think, a much more unified set of values that they were able to relate with each other through and care about each other through. So they're kind of, but when they became monastics, there's also real clear values about what it meant to be a monastic. So for instance, when a monastic is out in practicing, the other monks were very clear. You're here to practice the way to become awakened, not for 500 girls, So they kind of a little bit tease him about it. And because of that, he feels actual shame. Like, oh, I realize that's not what I'm supposed to be doing. And so then he changes and actually that's another interesting thing about this is that, is how shame is understood in Buddhism. So he doesn't feel ashamed of himself and then get really guilty and get really depressed and then says, well, all these people are making, are kind of calling me a hired hand, gosh, get really angry. He actually takes the experience of saying, oh, I am not living up to the most ideal. I'm not living up to, maybe the word ideal, I'm not living up to the actual vocation, the actual role of a monastic. The full strength. I can do better. So it's actually coming from a very deep sense of self-confidence that I can do better. And then what he does is he applies himself with effort and he wakes up. Right? We sometimes use the word shame in Buddhism, which I think often gets misunderstood a little bit because in the West especially, shame is really a negative emotion. Right? We don't want to feel shame because shame gets often linked up with guilt and self-criticism and self-hatred and lots of negative emotions. Shame in Buddhism actually is a trigger for you to cultivate. So you have a deep trust and faith in your actual ability to wake up. You have a sense of your true potential. And so when you don't live up to that potential, you feel a kind of pain. Like, I could have done better. And then what do you do from that feeling is that you don't hide it. So what happens is sometimes we feel like I could have done better, but we don't want to feel that because it's a little bit of a painful experience, so we cover it up. And we say, well, I actually didn't do that. Or I cover it over with some anger or emotion so that I hide that part of me from myself. But Buddhism say, actually, we look at that experience and say, yeah, we can do better. We acknowledge that we can do better. We acknowledge the mistake, and then we make a resolve to do better, and we change for the better. And that's the whole process. So the process in Buddhism is this self-transformation. So the place where there's a friction of this, you could say shame or embarrassment, but this not coming from a place of self-criticism, like a self-hatred, but actually coming from a place of confidence that allows one to change for the better. So that's for Venerable Nanda. Okay.
What you mentioned recalled me that actually the practice of repentance, right?
Yeah,
it's a lot of elements of the shame. And I remember one time the Dharma Master Heng Sure, the one of the most senior nuns, like she, because included me. In the beginning, when I started the practice, the repentance was a really difficult one because I had ability to recognize the mistakes, what I'd done, but I identify with them. So I feel, oh my God, again and again, and it was no freedom from it. It's more kind of accumulation of this self-criticism and so on. And that I really remember that, like she said that, actually it is kind of feeling like, oh wow, in inner us, that how I can do it in this way. But after that is kind of joy arising that I can be free from that. And so I can decide, follow differently. Again, if will be faced at the same situation again, I can be free with that. So this protective system said awa to me because it's actually something what's like we have the problem with the body, we feel the pain. So if we don't feel the pain, we have probably a lot of problem, it could be. So we can recognize the illnesses and just care and let go and move forward, right?
Yeah, the process of repentance is actually a very important process in Buddhist practice. If people know the Samantabhadra's conduct and vows, I believe it's the fourth one. The fourth, does it sound good? Can people hear? Hello? Let me turn this up. The fourth vow and practice of Samantabhadra Bodhisattva is repentance and reform. And so, for my sense about it, is repentance is kind of like just doing your dirty laundry, but it's the dirty laundry of your mind. And so, if we don't want our clothes to smell and ourselves to stink, so we don't smell it, but our minds can get the same way, if you want to say our minds, but it's actually our actions and our whole way of being. So the repentance is actually kind of putting soap in there and cleaning it out. There's nothing you could say glamorous about it particularly. It's a little bit kind of getting into the muck, but it's actually very important. It's very important. But the attitude Jin-Wei mentioned is really important too, is that there's a bit of a fearlessness required to be able to face ourselves honestly. There's a kind of a vulnerability there of being able to admit to ourselves when we do something wrong. But what we find, and I think we find with one another even, let's say we make a mistake and we ask somebody for forgiveness, is that if we really take honest responsibility for what we've done and we sincerely ask for forgiveness, usually the other person forgives us and somehow something is resolved.
Include ourselves.
And also including ourselves. I mean, the question is also, can we ask forgiveness from ourselves? And so usually something is resolved. But there's an inner fear somehow, something like, if I say that, they're going to judge me in this particular way, and then I'm going to, and then I'm going to da-da-da, and da-da-da, so I better tell some other story about it. And so this sense is a kind of honest openness, and then a willingness to admit to it, and then at the same time there's a sense of renewing to say, I'm going to do better. So next time that it happens, I'm not going to make the same mistake. And so that's what Venerable Nanda did. So in fact, what I had as a second sutta is also on Venerable Nanda. This is from the Anguttara Nikaya. And Venerable Nanda actually becomes foremost in self-control. Of all the Buddha's disciples, he becomes foremost in self-control. And so this is one of the Buddhas talking about Venerable Nanda being very good at self-control. Okay, so he says, Bhikkhus, one speaking rightly would say of Ananda that he is a clansman, that he is strong. So he lists out different qualities of Venerable Nanda. One is that he's part of the clan, a Shakyan, that he is strong, probably physically strong. He is graceful. And then number 4, and that he is strongly prone to lust. How else could Nanda lead the complete and pure spiritual life unless he guarded the doors of his sense faculties, observed the moderation in eating, was intent on wakefulness, and possessed mindfulness and clear comprehension? So he says Venerable Nanda here is what? He's a member of the Shakyan clan. He's strong. He's young, probably healthy. He's beautiful and graceful and handsome, but he's very strongly prone to lust. So given that, how could he wake up? He says, well, how did he do it? He guarded his sense faculties, his sense doors. He observed moderation in eating, which is interesting. He was intent on wakefulness, and he possessed mindfulness and clear comprehension. So I'll just read the first one of that list. Actually, the Buddha goes through each one of them and explains each of those practices. But the first one he says, Bhikkhus, this is how Nanda guards the doors of the sense faculties. If he needs to look to the east, he does so after he has fully considered the matter and clearly comprehends it thus. When I look to the east, bad, unwholesome states of longing and dejection will not flow into me. If he needs to look to the west, he has the same reflection, that bad, unwholesome states of longing and dejection will not flow in upon me. And same goes for the north, the south, up, down, and in the intermediate direction. He does so after he fully considers the matter and clearly comprehends it thus. When I look to the intermediate direction, bad, unwholesome states of longing and dejection will not flow in upon me. That is how Nanda guards the doors of his sense faculties. So this is an important one. Clearly, our eyes. If you notice, for instance, if people do the ceremony and we do the circumambulation, one key thing to do if you want to not get really distracted is keep your eyes in one place. So like you're reciting, if I'm walking behind Jin-Wei, I just maybe keep my eyes on the center of his back, or maybe at the bottom of his feet so I don't step on him. The moment the eyes start to wander and look around the hall, the mind just gets really distracted, right? I think you can see that probably if you're just walking outside as well. If your eyes are kind of glancing, darting around, you don't really feel that stable.
Also highly recommended with meditation as well. So if you look around, if you try to sit, it probably will be really difficult to
calm down the mind.
Calm down, concentrate the mind, and relax way.
And so the meditation is usually you bring your eyes to watch your nose watch your mouth, and your mouth down to your dantian. You kind of bring your energy and your attention downwards, right, to your center. And by doing that, what you find is that the senses become much more steady. The senses become much more steady. Rather than the senses always going out to the next thing, we kind of feel kind of a coolness to our senses. Actually, that's really difficult now with modern technology because we always have something that's... Do you have a question?
Say like we're not that disciplined as you guys are and our senses go out, or actually if you are if a person is already trained in like disciplining their senses, but that's physical, right? Like you're used to like having your eyes look down, but what if you accidentally like look up and you find something like attractive and you see your mind moving? Like how do you then go inside your mind and like stop it there?
How do you stop the mind
what's
from...
the reflection you guys use when you feel your mind, you can see your mind moving after you've looked, kind of? Yeah, after you looked.
After you've looked. You want to answer that?
So I think the first moment when you notice that your mind moving is a really important moment. You are aware of this movement. Very, very often we don't know.
Yeah,
we just
true.
follow, right?
Yeah, we just follow.
So if you can notice and gently return whatever the topic of is our practice, gently, kindly, okay, I a little bit walk out, I'm returned back because I noticed that I am, from some reasons, lost my mindfulness, for instance. So and I think that very often we hear this word, this is like going to the gym or trying to do jogging, and it takes a work, takes a time, but it's for sure doable, so, and it also depends of the day or the moods what we have, many factors, sometimes we can be pretty clear, sometimes not, in many reasons, so.
Could you go into like the possible, like different meditation topics that we could do? Like, I know there's reciting of the Buddha's name or Bodhisattva's name, but like, are there other things that you guys do, or just recite a name?
Okay. Well, maybe go two thoughts on that. One is, so the mind moving, when you say that, as Jin-Wei just said, it's really good that you can catch that. And so in some sense, in this training of the sense restraint, which is, again, not something we probably talk too much about in the world outside. People don't talk about something called sense restraint. But in Buddhism, it's actually very important. It's often the beginning of practice. We start to restrain our senses. Because if we can restrain our senses, we realize we actually have a lot of power over the mind, that we can actually choose what we're doing with our senses. Rather than just having it go out through desire, we actually can use it for something more wholesome. Right? And so the thing to see is, okay, so the mind's movement, you can slowly catch it earlier and earlier. So even the looking starts with a wanting to look. If that makes sense. So there's a kind of I want to see something. So the mind goes out. So you, especially if you're reciting, like say we're in the Buddha hall, then there's a sense of trying to catch the mind before it goes out. It moves early and earlier on in the process. And the earlier and earlier we can catch it, the more, you can say, freedom we have of mind to then use it for practice, to use it for liberation. And there's actually a kind of corresponding openness and joy that comes when we're not caught up in our desires. Right? But then when your question goes, well, what do we do when we're kind of caught in it, right? I guess depending on what level is it, from interest, like, oh, that person's very attractive, to like, whoa, a kind of an obsession. There's different gradations of attachment and entanglement. The Buddha gives many Dharma methods. Essentially, the Dharma methods are essentially like medicine. For different issue problems, we have different medicine. And so one is, as you mentioned, reciting the Buddha's name, reciting Guanyin Bodhisattva's name. We have mindfulness of the breath. For actual, you could say, attachment to form and kind of lust, the Buddha often gave reflections on the body. And his reflections were very, what do you would say, clinical. He would describe the body as very clinical. Like in the mornings we would chant, there's a Buddha's reflection of the 32 parts of the body, and say this body is a bag of skin filled with unattractive things. That's how the chant goes. In this body there are kesa, hair of the head, loma, hair of the body. So it goes through. So there's hair of the head, hair of the body, skin, teeth, nails, flesh, membranes, right? So it goes through and it dissects the body. And says, what is it? It's a bag of skin. And so the process because usually our mind does not pay attention to that. The important thing though is not to get into a realm of disgust and rejection. So the tricky thing with our minds is that it can go from real obsession to rejecting. And the rejecting is also not good because that's kind of aversion and hatred. So we want to find a place of equilibrium. So these teachings are antidotes for the mind. So if our mind's caught up in lust, because we're too busy looking at the attractive things of something, Like Reverend Heng Sure often gives the idea of the flowers, right? Are either attracted to the flowers, but we miss, the stem. And if there's thorns on the flower, we miss the thorns because we're just looking at the flower. In the Buddha's teachings, it's okay, you look at the whole thing. And then what it does is it cools the mind. It cools the mind from getting so involved with it. That's one other method that is sometimes used. Oftentimes, if it's an attractive object, to contemplate some of the not so good aspects of that object of desire, or the dangers of that desire. I mean, you can even think of the dangers of the desire. So for instance, wow, if I really were to follow that thought, what would that mean? Well, that would mean potentially a lot of suffering. If it's like a householder who's a married man, I mean, the eyes go out, they see something, and the mind actually follows it. And if you actually were to continue on with that process, I mean, there's a lot of suffering in store for the family and for himself, right? But if he can catch himself beforehand and go, whoa, I don't want all that suffering to happen, and he can actually see that and then not go that way, then there's actually a corresponding freedom from all that suffering that would have arisen in his mind, in his life. You don't really see it, so that's why the tricky thing sometimes in practice is that a lot of the benefits of the practice are the things that don't happen to us. And we usually don't see that because we're not looking for the things that aren't happening. That we got enough food to eat, people around us generally are honest, the people we get along.
Less drama.
There's a lot of less drama. The monastery drama is usually very tame drama compared to the world outside. So all the kind of stuff you go, oh, we usually don't pay attention to it because we're so busy trying to get something. Oh, I want to get enlightened, or I want to get something special. But we realize actually most of the practice is not getting a lot of suffering because we're getting freed from it. And so hopefully as we practice, that's what's happening, is we're little bit by little bit getting freer and freer from our suffering, from our afflictions. That's really what's important. And then what we'll find is that our lives become much more peaceful, much more happy, much more content. And then bit by bit, with role models like Venerable Nanda, and even his wife, Venerable Janapa Kalyani, we can, clearly people here are not monastics, but I think there's elements of their stories about, say, not being too attached to physical beauty. Because I think we can imagine how attachment to one's appearance could lead to a lot of suffering. I think in modern times we have, eating disorders, we have body image issues, a lot of things around in modern society that come because of the physical appearance. So we're freed of that, then all the corresponding afflictions that come from that we can get freed of as well, right? Okay, I don't know if there's any other questions or thoughts. So it's pretty much 9, so usually we end around 9 o'clock. Unless there's something else people have. Oh, Yuan.
阿弥陀佛法师. So whenever I hear the story of the Nanda, go to the Buddha, took him to the heaven and then tried to tell him, if you use up all your blessing, then in the end you still need to go down. And
Yeah.
But my question is, so for heavenly people, what if you been reborn in a heavenly realm? Can heavenly people cultivate there?
Yes, they can.
Because whenever I recite the Earth Store Bodhisattva Sutra, in the
Yeah.
last chapter, and the Buddha told the Xukonzang Pusa said, so if for the Tian Long Gui Sheng, Wen Di Zang Ming, so for the heavenly people, dragon, ghost, and spirit, if they hear the name of the Earth Store Bodhisattva, they can quickly transcend their bad karma and go to the sagely place. All their bad karma can disappear. So that's my question. So I know it's very hard to cultivate in the heaven, but can they cultivate if they really want?
Yes, for sure. There's many stories of the heavenly beings cultivating. In a certain sense, all the Dharma protecting spirits are beings in the spiritual realms who I guess it's up to them if they're a practitioner or not per se, but they're protectors. So they make vows to say protect the monastery or protect those who uphold mantras, and that you can say in a certain sense becomes their practice because they value cultivation. They want to keep this in the world. And so if you really want to read very interesting stories about it, Ajahn Mun, he's saying Ajahn Mun has a biography. He's in the Thai forest tradition, and he's actually like a modern day arhat. It's actually, if you really want to get us, we're talking about arhats in this, in these stories. Ajahn Mun is a modern day Thai forest master who was Ajahn Chah's teacher, who was Ajahn Sumedho's teacher. Actually, many of the insight meditation groups in the West, like say Jack Kornfield, studied under Ajahn Chah. And Ajahn Chah was a student of Ajahn Mun. And Ajahn Mun was considered an arhat. And so in that book, it describes his practice about realizing arhatship. And I was thinking of bringing it tonight, just to read parts of it, to give people a flavor of what it's like to realize arhatship, because it actually describes his awakening and all the devas coming from that, all the different parts of the heavens, all the different heavens coming to congratulate him and saying, wow, you woke up. We saw this kind of earth, the cosmos shook. He said, the cosmos shook, there's a bright light. So he said, only humans who are so dull-witted aren't even aware that anything happened. We devas could see the spiritual light that was radiating from your being when you woke up. So we're all here to congratulate you. And then they actually ask for Dharma teaching. So the teachings in Buddhism often says that the Deva realms or the God realms are in certain sense not as ideal as the human realm because it's so pleasant. So it's in some sense harder to cultivate because when everything goes really well, then we can easily forget the practice. And I think that's something we can actually just see in our own experience. Sometimes when things get really pleasant, and I guess I can kind of feel it a little bit. You start practicing, for some of the people who have been Buddhists for a while, the suffering is generally, it's no longer as drastic as when we start practicing Buddhism, when actually a lot of things change because we actually start holding precepts, we have better speech, we calm down our mind a little bit and our relationships get better. So it's pretty drastic changes and often go progress. But after, say 5 years, 10 years, it kind of plateaus. And there's well, life is pretty good. I don't have that much suffering. A lot of other people seem to have a lot more suffering. And there's a kind of a contentment that's not really, it's like a self-satisfaction that basically you no longer are vigorous in your practice. So you can see that kind of state happens when we practice. Yeah. Yeah, it definitely happens to Buddhists. What do you do when you hit a plateau? I'm sure you can ask a lot of, we won't go too long. I'm sure you can ask many people here, because I think many people who've been Buddhists for a while probably all hit that. They have a saying even in Chinese saying, 学佛2年，佛在眼前；学佛10年，佛在天边。Something like that, right? I don't know if I got the saying quite right. Saying that when you just learn Buddhism for the first 2 years, the Buddha is right in front of you. You're in the presence of the Buddha all the time. After 10 years, the Buddha disappears over the horizon. You don't know where he went. 学佛1年，佛在眼前；学佛3年，佛在天边。So actually even shorter. First 1 year, the Buddha is right next to you. After 3 years, the Buddha disappears. So what do we do? Well, I think that's when we need to actually have real good vows that are guiding us.
Being here is really helpful.
Yeah,
we together can investigate and
good friends,
support, and the spiritual friendship is, I think, really important too.
I think if I were to my own process, I think being real honest about where I'm at and having something I'm working on not to be too idealistic. And I think that's one of the real faults I had when I started, you could say, is that I kind of had an ideal version of what it meant to be a cultivator and try to do that. But that wasn't actually realistic given my causes and conditions. So there's a sense that you could say that's maybe a direction. I'm aspiring to that direction, but I need to be real honest. Here, I'm here with all my desires and afflictions and difficulties, and not to be bummed out about it, but just to be honest about it and say, okay, I'm working on that now. And I think the experience is, especially when you're in this association, DRBA, that by everyone, partly because we have these different cultures and type of people living, working, and practicing together all the time, a lot of afflictions arise in that process. Because the person next to you doesn't share exactly the same values you do. And so what that does is it forces us, if we are aware of it, to transform our afflictions. Rather than say blame the other person. That's the key thing we don't want to do, is blame the other person. Like, well, the reason I'm so afflicted is because Jin-Wei over here. Now, if he was just different, I'd be a lot better. And that you can do that in the family too. I mean, if you go home, I'm sure parents and kids, Connie, of your parents, I'm sure there's plenty of things to work with there, right? I'm sure there's usually in our relationships, there's a lot of places that we can work on. And so, so that makes it a little bit more fun because we can actually work on something. It's like, I think it's kind of like playing a video game. You gotta play a video game, you kind of gain new skills and stuff. So in the Dharma, you're learning new skills, but these skills are much more useful than a video game.
But I think also, if I can add something, for me it's really helpful this contemplation about impermanence, that everything change all the time, and we can do a good experiment. If I sit for 30 minutes, for instance, and I tell to myself, this is last sit in my life, how I can be sit. And this day is the last day. I don't know what's going to happen. And we can watch the media that's, it's really easy to lose their life in many ways, or have the serious sickness or whatever. And now I have all full strength to do something. And it's not in the depressed way that, memento mori, like in the Latin expression, you remember about your death, but kind of wholesome way that it's, be aware that this is the pattern of the reality, and it's good to keep in somewhere in the mind and appreciate everything what we have, and also have the kind of inspiration to use the time the best as I can. So.
Yep. Okay, so pretty much time, a little bit over. So we have our dedication of merit, which is on the back of the Dharma request sheet. So this is a chance for everyone. You've all been very patient with Jin-Wei and myself listening to us talk for a whole hour and a half. And so there's a lot of merit to that. I don't know if there's a lot of merit, but there's some goodness, practicing patience, learning some Dharma, or listening to some Dharma. And so the idea is not to keep it for ourselves, but to share it with other people. So if we have family or friends, yesterday Reverend Heng Sure mentioned, well, actually I haven't really been paying attention, but I found out there was a huge fire in LA that's kind of similar to the fires up north in Ukiah, in that area. And it's like, I watched a video of like, whoa, it's pretty intense. There's a whole fire, it's like a mountain of flames. And so clearly there's people going through a lot of suffering. Imagine just literally all your possessions just up in flames in a couple of minutes, right? So however we want to share our goodness, you can do that. And the sense is that this actually really makes a difference. And it doesn't really, you don't really see it like materially per se, but somehow in the invisible realm, in the spiritual realm, something, you could say our hearts and minds, they connect. They're not my body just doesn't end, or not my body, our actual mind, what we actually can be, doesn't just end with this body. You know, we kind of are often limit ourselves just to the body, but our minds interconnect, interreflect. Buddhism has actually a beautiful image of the Indra's net. Have people heard of that before? Indra's net is seen as one of these kind of beautiful nets that Lord Indra, one of the gods, has. And this net has in each interstice where the kind of the threads come together, there's a mani pearl. There's a beautiful reflecting pearl, and each pearl reflects every other pearl in this image. And so what you can imagine is that basically you look at any pearl and you see all the pearls on the net. But then you also see that reflection of that pearl and every other pearl as well in that pearl, ad infinitum, in each thing. And so this is actually just a metaphor for the interconnectedness of all things in the world. So we're all interconnected in that way. So if we can shine our light from our little pearl out, you know, it'll interreflect throughout the cosmos. So if we're sincere, that's what the practice is about. Okay, so maybe we can put our palms together. I don't think Alan has his guitar. No? Okay. Okay. May every living being, our minds as one and radiant with light, share the fruits of peace, with hearts of goodness, luminous and bright. If people hear and see how hands and hearts can find in giving unity, may our minds awake to great compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find reward. May all who sorrow leave their grief and pain. May this boundless light break the darkness of their endless night. Because our hearts are one, this world of pain turns into paradise. May all become compassionate and wise. May all become compassionate and wise. Okay, so actually maybe we've got a couple brief announcements. So we're pretty much moving into our winter break for the year. Professor Verhoeven's class on Friday nights officially had its last class yesterday.
This year?
Yeah, this year. He'll start in February next year. Stephen Tainer on Wednesdays has, I think, two more classes. I think the Thursday night group is still happening throughout the break. Nuns will be coming this Sunday, third Sunday of the month. And we're actually having a one-day Buddha recitation tomorrow here, walking meditation recitation from 7:30 a.m. So people are welcome to come for that tomorrow.
Dharma Recovery, each fourth Tuesday each month.
Fourth Tuesday? No, Dharma Recovery. Yeah, so it's for people who maybe have some kind of addiction or something that they're recovering from. So that's the Dharma Recovery class.
Including self.
Including yourself. I'm addicted to myself. So, okay. Anything I'm missing? Okay. Well, appreciate all those who joined online as well. Potentially there might be more online than in the room, but it's good that everyone showed up. Okay, so we'll bow to the Buddhas 3 times, and Master Hua. There's often a saying, if it's the Tao, advance. If it's not, you can put it down. Take what is good and put it into practice, and anything that's not so good, we improve it in ourselves. Okay. bow in respect to the Venerable Master. Namo Amito